So if you really want to protect your brain from aging, the absolute worst thing you can do might actually be the exact thing you were doing right now.
Right, like sitting down with your morning coffee to crush the daily crossword puzzle.
Exactly. Which is, I mean, it's pretty wild to hear.
It sounds completely counterintuitive. We've been told for decades, that brain games are the ultimate defense against cognitive decline.
Yeah, the classic use it or lose it advice.
Right. But the science on how we actually build mental resilience it's shifting dramatically right now.
And we are definitely going to get into exactly why that crossword puzzle is a trap. But before we completely tear down your morning routine, I actually want you to try something our source material recommends.
Oh, the breathing exercise.
Yeah. So just for a moment, put your feet flat on the floor, relax your shoulders, and, if you are somewhere safe to do so, try breathing in for a count of 4 and then exhaling for a count of 6.
Obviously, you don't have to do it with us right this second.
Right. But just understanding that rhythm 4 in, 6 out is actually super crucial.
It is, because that specific ratio is fascinating. It's not just some generic relaxation tip you'd find on a blog.
Now, it's deeply biological.
Exactly. When you extend your exhale to be longer than your inhale, you are mechanically signaling the vagus nerve to downregulate your sympathetic nervous system.
Which basically pulls you out of that frantic go mode that pretty much defines modern life.
Yeah, and it drops you right into the parasympathetic slow mode.
And that actually preps your brain to physically process and retain the dense information you're about to hear on this deep dive.
Which is perfect because we have a lot to cover.
We really do. So today, we are pulling from a webinar transcript provided by an organization called Play Attention.
Right, they recently hosted a presentation for their Silver Minds Spring Bootcamp.
Yeah, which is a program focused entirely on cognitive vitality for individuals over 50.
So our mission today is to impartially explore the blueprint they lay out for keeping the brain sharp as we age.
And to look at the claims they make about reversing executive dysfunction.
Exactly. We really want to figure out what actually works when it comes to cognitive longevity.
Because to really grasp the gravity of this source material, it helps to look at this AARP survey they referenced early in the presentation.
Oh, that survey was eye-opening.
Yeah. So they asked retired individuals and people just about to retire to identify their absolute #1 concern about aging.
And you would naturally assume the top answer was financial, right?
Oh, 100%. Like, outliving a 401k is a massive cultural anxiety.
Or even just a sudden physical health crisis.
Right, like a stroke or a heart attack.
But the actual data pointed in a completely different direction. The #1 response, the thing literally keeping this demographic awake at night, was cognitive health.
Which makes total sense when you really think about it. Because the brutal reality is that having financial security or, a perfectly healthy heart doesn't mean much if you lose the ability to remember a loved one's name.
Or if you just can't follow the thread of a conversation with your oldest friends anymore.
Exactly. Your brain is the filter through which you experience your entire existence.
Yeah, so if that filter degrades, the quality of everything else just plummets.
Yet despite it being our primary concern, society has historically held this incredibly fatalistic view of how the brain ages.
Oh, absolutely. The traditional model of neuroscience was deeply, deeply pessimistic.
Which kind of begs the question, right? Like, if the brain isn't just a static machine destined to break down, why did the scientific community believe for so long that we were basically neurologically doomed after childhood?
Well, it mostly stems from early anatomical observations. For a long time, the widely accepted rule was that the human brain was essentially hardwired by the time you were 9 years old.
Wait, 9? That early?
Yeah, just 9. Scientists observed this explosive synaptic growth that happens in early childhood, which is then followed by a period of stabilization and synaptic pruning.
So they just assumed that was it.
Pretty much. The logical, though entirely incorrect conclusion was that once you reached adulthood, you had the neurological hardware you were going to have for the rest of your life.
Wow. So from there, it was believed to just be a slow, inevitable decline.
Right. Just losing neurons year by year until the end.
But then modern fMRI technology comes along with the discovery of neuroplasticity, and completely shatters that myth.
Completely. And the source material highlights this with a brilliant anecdotal example about a woman named Dorothy.
Oh, I love this part. Dorothy completed a tandem skydive at 104 years old.
Which is just incredible.
Right. But more importantly, she stayed mentally sharp, she engaged with her community, and actively learned new things past a century of life.
She is living proof of the modern scientific consensus. Age is not a limiting factor for changing your brain as long as you give it the right stimuli.
So what the transcript explores here is the underlying mechanism that actually protects people like Dorothy.
Right, it's a concept called cognitive reserve.
And to illustrate this, the webinar points to some highly revealing autopsy studies, right?
Yes. What's fascinating here is researchers examined the brains of deceased individuals and found the undeniable severe physical hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease.
We are talking heavy biological damage.
Yeah,
Amyloid plaques, tau tangles.
exactly. The brain tissue itself was riddled with the disease.
But the shocking part of this study was the disconnect between the physical tissue and the person's actual life.
Right, because when researchers interviewed the friends and families of those specific individuals, the families reported absolutely zero symptoms of cognitive decline while they were alive.
Not at all.
None. No memory loss, no confusion, no behavioral changes whatsoever.
So the physical pathology of Alzheimer's was present, but the functional decline never happened.
Exactly. And that protective buffer, that is cognitive reserve.
Okay, let me see if I can synthesize this for everyone listening. So essentially, cognitive reserve is like a city's traffic grid.
Oh, I like this analogy.
Yeah. So if you have a poorly planned city with only one major highway and an accident happens on that highway, or in the brain's case, if age or a disease blocks a specific neural pathway, traffic comes to a complete standstill.
Right, the person loses that cognitive function entirely.
Exactly. But if a brain is built high cognitive reserve, it is like a city with a massive complex grid of side streets, avenues, and bypasses.
Mm-hmm.
So if the main road gets blocked by plaques or tangles, the brain just instantly detours the electrical signals down a bunch of alternative side streets. The information still gets to where it needs to go,
Yeah.
and the person never even notices a traffic jam.
That is an excellent way to visualize the architecture of the brain. The whole goal of cognitive vitality, as outlined in the Silver Minds program, is to build as many of those side streets as humanly possible before you ever need them.
But that brings us to the practical application. If building this robust traffic grid of alternative neural pathways is the ultimate goal, how do we actually pave those roads?
Well, the transcript outlines 5 specific evidence-based pillars.
Right, and I want to get into the actual biological mechanisms here. The first pillar they list is social connection. Now, most people think of socializing purely as emotional support.
Sure, like feeling good around friends.
Exactly. But how does it physically build brain reserve?
It's pretty wild, actually. Navigating real-time human conversation is one of the most cognitively demanding tasks a human can perform.
Really? Just talking?
Yeah, because it requires immense parallel processing. You are interpreting complex language, decoding microexpressions, analyzing tone, predicting what the person will say next, and formulating your own response.
All at the same time.
All in milliseconds. That intense, unpredictable processing requirement forces the brain to constantly wire and rewire new connections.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Human beings are unpredictable, so the brain just has to stay on its toes.
Exactly.
Okay, so the second pillar they mentioned is regular movement. And we all know exercise is good for us, but the source material claims it directly impacts cognitive reserve. How exactly?
Exercise acts like a biological power wash for the brain.
A power wash.
Yeah. Cardiovascular movement dramatically increases blood flow, which physically flushes out metabolic waste that accumulates in the brain tissue.
Oh.
But more importantly, it triggers the release of something called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF.
Okay, BVNF, what does that do?
You can think of BDNF as essentially miracle, grow, or high-grade fertilizer for new neural pathways. Without it, the brain really struggles to grow new connections.
Okay, so we have the unpredictable processing of socializing and the biological power wash of exercise.
Right.
The third pillar is mindfulness, which ties back to the breathing exercise we discussed at the top of the deep dive. But again, how does sitting quietly physically protect against a disease like Alzheimer's? It sounds a bit abstract.
It comes down to cortisol management. Chronic stress floods the brain with cortisol, and over time, high levels of cortisol have been shown to literally degrade and shrink the hippocampus.
And that's the brain's primary memory center, right?
Right? Exactly. Mindfulness practices mechanically lower that cortisol production, effectively protecting the physical structure of the hippocampus from neurotoxic stress.
Wow. Okay, so it is actively halting chemical damage.
It is.
Now, the fourth pillar is lifelong learning paired with real-world practice, and the fifth is executive function training. But I want to pause here.
Oh.
Yeah, okay, let's unpack this,
Yeah.
because I need to push back on that fourth pillar, lifelong learning. This is where the crossword puzzle paradox comes in.
Ah, yes. The Wordle trap.
Exactly. I can guarantee you there are listeners right now thinking, I do the Wordle every morning, I play Sudoku, I do the Sunday New York Times crossword. I am continuously learning and building cognitive reserve.
It is an incredibly common assumption, but according to the neuroplasticity principles outlined in the transcript, it is a dangerous trap.
Why, though? If I am figuring out a difficult puzzle, aren't I using my brain?
You are using your brain, yes, but you are not changing your brain.
Wait, what's the difference?
If you are already great at Wordle, or if you understand the underlying logic and syntax of a crossword puzzle, you are not actually sparking new neural pathways. You are simply traveling down paths that are already deeply grooved into your brain.
Oh, I see.
It feels challenging in the moment, but structurally it is comfortable and familiar to your neural network.
So to use our earlier analogy, doing the daily crossword is just driving your mental car back and forth down the massive highway you already built decades ago.
Precisely. You aren't paving any new side streets.
Right.
To build true cognitive reserve, the brain strictly demands novel challenges. You have to push past what you are already proficient at.
Meaning you have to be bad at it first.
Exactly. The brain needs to be forced to adapt to a stimulus that is entirely new and slightly frustrating. If the activity doesn't induce a state of mild cognitive friction or frustration, you aren't building reserve, you are just maintaining the status quo.
That is fascinating, but also a little daunting. To genuinely protect the brain, we have to constantly subject ourselves to being bad at things until we learn them.
It's not easy, no.
And this actually leads us directly into the biggest hurdle discussed in the webinar. Let's say we understand these pillars. We logically know we need the unpredictable stimuli of socializing, the BDNF flush of exercise.
The cortisol reduction of mindfulness.
Right, and the frustrating novelty of true lifelong learning.
The intellectual understanding is there.
Right, but then we just don't do them.
Yeah.
There is a massive, incredibly human disconnect between knowing the right thing to do and actually doing it.
It's the knowing versus doing gap.
Exactly. During the Play Attention webinar, the hosts asked the attendees what derails their good intentions, and the chat responses were painfully relatable.
What were the attendees citing as their primary roadblocks?
It was a very honest cross-section of modern life. One attendee admitted she intends to go for a walk, but opens her phone to check one message, starts doom scrolling, and suddenly 2 hours have vanished.
We've all been there.
Right. Another mentioned profound end-of-day work fatigue. Another person said they simply forget to initiate the task, and their whole routine falls apart. The intent is entirely divorced from the follow-through.
Which brings us to a critical inquiry. If we logically possess the blueprint for our own cognitive survival and longevity, why is our brain so easily hijacked by a glowing screen or just a minor wave of fatigue?
And the source material argues that the answer lies in the fifth pillar, executive function. It turns out executive function is quite literally the management system of the brain.
Yes,
Can you break down what that actually encompasses?
absolutely. Executive function is the complex set of high-level mental processes that control our attention, our behavioral inhibition, our emotional regulation, our working memory, and our ability to prioritize tasks and initiate action.
Okay, that's a lot.
It is. You can think of it as the CEO of the brain.
Okay, I love that. So, you can have the best architectural blueprint in the world for building cognitive reserve. But if the CEO is asleep at the wheel or distracted by a shiny object, the workers are never going to build the house.
That's spot on.
It is your executive function that takes your abstract intention to go to the gym and translates it into the physical action of putting on your sneakers.
And the transcript highlights a concerning biological reality regarding aging and executive function.
Right, because it changes as we get older.
Yes. As we age, our raw processing speed naturally slows down slightly, and our neurological ability to filter out irrelevant distractions diminishes.
Which is frustrating for anyone.
True. But the presenters note this becomes a massive, destabilizing crisis for a specific demographic, older adults with ADHD.
Yes. The source makes a really interesting point here about late-stage ADHD diagnoses. They note that there is really no such thing as late-onset ADHD.
Right.
If you are struggling with it in your 60s, you have had it your entire life.
But what often happens is that highly intelligent individuals spend their 20s, 30s, and 40s building incredibly intricate, customized coping mechanisms.
Just to manage their baseline executive dysfunction.
Exactly. They figure out elaborate workarounds to force themselves to focus.
But then they hit their late 50s or 60s, hormones change, that baseline processing speed drops just a fraction of a millisecond, and suddenly the mental scaffolding they have relied on for 40 years just collapses.
It just gives way. The subtle biological changes of aging completely overwhelm their historical coping systems.
And they suddenly find themselves entirely unable to initiate or follow through on basic routines.
Which is an incredibly demoralizing experience. It frequently leads to shame, isolation, and a rapid acceleration of cognitive decline.
Because if your executive function breaks down, the other four pillars, socializing, moving, mindfulness, and learning, collapse with it. You simply cannot execute the protective behaviors. So, if a failing executive function is the ultimate roadblock, how do we fix the CEO? Because telling someone who is experiencing executive dysfunction to just focus more is essentially like telling someone with poor eyesight to just try seeing better.
Right, it's functionally useless advice.
Yeah. So what's the solution?
According to the transcript, Play Attention attempts to solve this underlying structural issue using biofeedback technology. They claim that standard behavioral pep talks fail because they don't train the neurological mechanism of attention itself.
And this is where the physical technology behind the Silver Minds Bootcamp comes into play. And honestly, it sounds almost like science fiction.
It really does.
They utilize a wearable device called a body wave armband. The user slides this band onto their arm or leg, and it contains 3 sensors that sit flush against the skin. These sensors claim to literally monitor the user's brain activity, specifically their brain waves, in real time. It reads exactly how attentive and focused the brain is at that exact millisecond.
And that real-time data is fed directly into a computer program where the user is engaging in various cognitive exercises.
Right.
But the crucial differentiator here is that the user is not using a mouse or a keyboard or a touchscreen to control the program. They are controlling the outcome of the digital exercise purely with their mind.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It operates almost like telekinesis, but for cognitive therapy.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
If the sensors read that your brain is locked in a state of high attention, the character on the screen moves correctly, or the working memory gain progresses. But the absolute second your mind wanders.
Like if you start stressing about a work email.
Yeah. Or if you get distracted by a dog barking outside the sensors register that drop in executive focus, and the digital exercise immediately stops.
Wow. It just halts.
Yes. The only way to make the game resume is to consciously recognize your distraction, manually regulate your brain waves, and pull your focus back to the task.
And the reason the source material champions this approach over standard brain training phone apps is the concept of transferability.
Because phone apps don't really transfer.
No, they usually don't. With a typical app, you can passively click buttons while half watching a television show. You will eventually get a high score on that specific game, but that skill rarely transfers to real-world attention.
Makes sense.
Biofeedback, on the other hand, forces the user to actively strengthen the actual neural pathways responsible for sustaining attention.
And the webinar presenters point to what they claim is rigorous, independent science to back this up, specifically detailing 3 separate studies conducted by Tufts University School of Medicine.
Right. They wanted to test if this biofeedback integration actually creates meaningful change.
Exactly.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the methodology of the Tufts study is really worth examining. Researchers took individuals diagnosed with ADHD and separated them into 3 distinct cohorts to isolate the variable of biofeedback.
Okay, so group 1 received the full integration, right?
Yes, the Play Attention biofeedback armband combined with behavior shaping.
And just to clarify for everyone, behavior shaping is a psychological concept where the facilitator rewards successive, incremental approximations of a targeted behavior over time, rather than just waiting for the final perfect result.
Exactly. It's about rewarding progress. Now, Group 2 engaged only in the cognitive computer games. They used a standard mouse and keyboard with absolutely no biofeedback armband.
Got it.
And Group 3 acted as the control, receiving no intervention whatsoever.
So what were the results?
The outcome, according to the presentation, heavily favored the biofeedback approach. Group 2, the cohort that only played the computer games, did not demonstrate broad, sweeping life changes.
But Group 1 did.
Yes. Group 1, the biofeedback cohort, demonstrated what the researchers classified as global improvements.
Global improvements. That sounds huge.
In the field of cognitive neuroscience, global improvements is the ultimate metric of success. It means the neurological benefits did not remain isolated inside the parameters of the digital game.
So the executive function training actually transferred to the real world.
Exactly. The study observed measurable enhancements in their academic performance, their social behavioral regulation, and their real-world task completion. They successfully trained the brain's CEO to step back up and manage the company.
That is incredible. So we have the biological necessity of the five pillars, and we have this biofeedback technology aiming to repair the executive function required to actually perform those pillars.
Right.
But how does the Silver Minds Spring Bootcamp attempt to package this for a 50-plus demographic in a way that ensures they don't just buy the tech and leave it in a drawer? Because we all know that happens.
All the time. But the transcript reveals that play attention recognized a fundamental truth about human behavior.
Yeah.
Merely possessing the tools is insufficient.
You have to actually use them.
You have to embed those tools within an environment that essentially guarantees follow-through.
Yeah.
For this demographic, they determine that environment must be built on community.
Yes, the accountability piece. According to the webinar, the boot camp is structured as a 3-month bi-weekly program. Participants meet twice a week, and it is built entirely around community accountability to finally bridge that frustrating gap between knowing and doing.
Because, as one of their facilitators noted, it is remarkably easy to rationalize skipping a workout or a meditation session if you are only accountable to yourself.
Oh, definitely.
But if you know you have to log on to a virtual session on Tuesday morning and look a group of your peers in the eye,
Suddenly, the social pressure overrides the executive dysfunction, and you find yourself doing the work.
exactly. Friendly, structured accountability is an incredibly potent behavioral driver.
It really is.
But the program also relies heavily on personalization. The transcript outlines that before a participant even begins, they are required to undergo a comprehensive pre-assessment.
Okay, what does that involve?
This involves establishing a baseline using cognitive measures, which test things like immediate memory recall and raw processing speed, alongside the National Institute of Health Emotional Wellness scales.
Now, taking a test, assessing your memory, and emotional wellness can sound incredibly intimidating, especially for someone already worried about cognitive decline.
It can be scary, yes.
But the presenters emphasized that the goal of this assessment is strictly clarity, not diagnosis. They are not labeling participants. They are simply establishing a verifiable benchmark.
Right, because cognitive growth is often slow and subtle.
Yeah, having empirical data from the NIH scales, which measure psychological distress and positive affect, allows the program to prove to the user that their brain is actually changing over the 3 months. You cannot measure your progress if you don't know your starting coordinates.
Very true. And looking at the logistical claims of the program, they attempt to make it highly accessible by offering 2 distinct pathways.
Right. The pricing and structure are laid out clearly in the transcript. The fully virtual boot camp, which meets over video conferencing twice a week, is priced at $540 for the 3-month duration. Alternatively, for individuals located near Asheville, North Carolina, they offer an in-person iteration for $864, which physically includes the body wave armband biofeedback training directly in their center.
And, crazily enough, buried within the details of their pricing structure was a genuinely fascinating piece of biological trivia.
Oh, about the promo code.
Yeah, they noted a 10% discount for users who applied the promo code EARLYBIRD.
I found this detail incredibly insightful regarding how our biology shifts. The presenter explained that early bird wasn't just a marketing cliche.
It's biological.
Exactly. As human beings cross the threshold into their 60s and 70s, the body's internal circadian rhythm undergoes a structural shift. The endocrine system naturally begins releasing melatonin significantly earlier in the day than it does in younger adults.
It completely alters the internal clock. It is the biological reason why older demographics naturally wake up earlier, experience fatigue earlier in the evening, and yes, why the concept of the early bird special at restaurants became a cultural staple.
It's so funny to think about.
The hospitality industry observed the behavioral output of this biological shift long before the general public understood the endocrinology behind it.
It is a perfect, granular example of how our physical bodies inevitably change and why our routines and interventions must proactively adapt alongside them.
Which really serves as a fitting summary of the broader philosophy embedded in this source material.
So what does this all mean? If we pull all these distinct scientific threads together, what is the core insight to walk away with?
Well, based on the evidence presented, cognitive decline is not an absolute biological guarantee.
Right. You are not at the mercy of a ticking neurological clock that expires at age 9.
Not at all. You possess the biological capability to build cognitive reserve, to pave dense alternative side streets in your neural network so you can successfully navigate around the inevitable roadblocks of aging.
But as the transcript repeatedly proves, possessing the capability is radically different from executing the work.
That knowing versus doing gap again.
Exactly. Protecting your brain requires intentionally and continuously stepping out of your cognitive comfort zone. It demands that you actively manage and train your executive function so you can consistently integrate all 5 pillars into one cohesive lifestyle.
The unpredictable processing of social connection, the BDNF flush of movement, the cortisol reduction of mindfulness, the frustrating novelty of lifelong learning, and focused attention training.
It is not about mastering one single puzzle. It is about cultivating a resilient, highly adaptable neurological ecosystem.
And as we look at the biofeedback technology play attention is utilizing to train that executive function today, it forces a provocative question about where this is all heading.
It really does. Because if a simple armband communicating with a laptop can produce global improvements in focus and task completion right now, what happens in 10 or 20 years?
Right, when biofeedback sensors are seamlessly integrated into the glasses we wear or the earbuds we use every single day, constantly monitoring and correcting our attention in real time.
Will severe cognitive decline and executive dysfunction become an entirely optional part of the human experience? Will we be able to digitally guarantee our own cognitive vitality?
It is a profound technological horizon to consider, and it suggests that the future of aging might look vastly different than its past. Take a look at your routine today. Are you just walking down the same heavily paved mental roads you've walked for a decade? Or are you actually forcing yourself to hack through the jungle and build a brand new neural pathway? If you aren't a little frustrated by what you're learning today, your brain probably isn't growing.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. As you head back into your routine, keep that 4 in, 6 out breathing rhythm in your back pocket. Shift your nervous system. Embrace a little bit of novel frustration today, and we will see you next time.